Welcome back. Today we are diving into Angular lifecycle hooks. These Angular lifecycle hooks like ngOnInit, onChanges, and onDestroy help us to tap into key moments in our component lifecycle. So let's get started. So what are lifecycle hooks? As we can see from the official documentation here, lifecycle hooks are just methods basically which Angular calls at some specific point in our component lifecycle, which can start from component creation to our component destruction. So they help us manage different types of component behavior. In this specific video, we will focus on some common lifecycle hooks, which are ngOnInit, which basically is called once our component is initialized. And then we have got ngOnChanges, which is basically called when an input property changes. And at the end, we have got ngOnDestroy. It's like a cleanup. Whenever we destroy our component, this method is just called before that. So we will be diving deep into these three Angular lifecycle hooks today. So we will go to our Visual Code Studio and we will start with our ngOnInit component. So first we can go to our service file. So we have a backend service file here. I will be using real life examples to explain you this lifecycle hooks. Okay. So for example, we get post method, it returns an array of object which have all the posts inside them. Okay. So this return observable of type any, and we will return here any array, and this will return of type any array as well. Okay. Now I'll just show you what what this method does, and here you can see in our about section that we display all the data from this API. Okay. Now I will go into this component, which is about component.ts, and here this is the service and we get this post. Okay, we subscribe it and then we get the data. So every time we get the post, we store it inside this array. So we do all of this inside our first component lifecycle hook, which is ngOnInit. We just need to write it and we need to implement onInit as well here to make use of it, as this is the first thing which is called after we have initialized our constructor. So all the logic we need to do is we can put it inside this. Okay, so that's about ngOnInit. Now we will go to ngOnChanges. So ngOnChanges is, for example, in this component, if we have a input property and that input property, for example, it receives a chart data that can be of kind of any array. Okay, and here we can write our ngOnChanges method. Now whenever our this input property chart data it changes, our ngOnChanges method will get called and it will implement that specific logic we need for our application. So for that, first to use ngOnChanges we need to implement onChanges, and with that we will be able to create a method called ngOnChanges, as you can see here, and we can remove the void here because if we want we can return something, but we will write a condition here that if changes dot chart data. So we can write this changes and we can say if there is any changes to this chart data, then we can do whatever logic we want to write. So for this we'll say like that. Okay, so if changes in chart data, right, in this input property, if there is any changes, for example we have a API call like this and that data we are storing in a some variable and we are changing it, and the user is somehow changing or a backend is changing, at that time we want to update our front end, then we can use ngOnChanges and inside that we can write our logic. For example, we have a method called update UI and this method updates our UI. Okay, so we can have a logic here, logic to update our UI or whatever changes. So we can just, whenever this condition happen, we can just say this dot update our UI and we can pass all of our changes here as well. So we can say changes dot current value, and as we are passing a data inside our update UI method, it also needs to accept it. So we can say our update UI methods take data of any array. Okay, now this method will receive and we can have all the changes here like that. So in this way we can make changes to our component whenever there is a changes we are getting from input property. So in those scenarios we can use ngOnChanges. Now coming to the last method, which is ngOnDestroy. So we use ngOnDestroy to do mostly our cleaning up of our Angular application. For example, if we have multiple subscriptions which have been getting called, and if we need to, whenever our component is getting destroyed, we need to clean up those subscriptions. So for that also we need to implement it here. So we'll say on destroy, and then we can at the end we can say ngOnDestroy, and this method will get called every time our component is getting destroyed. So we can say here subscription cleaned up at the end. Okay, and I will show you by testing how this actually works, that it is getting called at the end. So if you have any kind of task, for example if you want to make some values false, true, you can also do it here, because you know the component is gonna get destroyed at this point. I will also show you some example. For example, if you have a timer subscription, okay, and inside that, if that is of type subscription, so you'll just add here like that. So this timer subscription, inside our constructor, if we have this dot timer subscription, and for example we call our data service, which is backend service, and same thing, if we get our post from there and we subscribe to it, okay, we receive our data, and there if we say data received, and here like that. Okay, so we have this timer subscription basically, which gets our data from our backend service, and we can have all of our logic, for example showing a spinner or not till we get the data and all that stuff. So we need to make sure that this timer subscription, which is continuously running, we need to stop it. So we can do that inside our ngOnDestroy. So for that we can unsubscribe to it. So we can say this dot timer subscription dot unsubscribe, so like that, and we don't actually need this undefined here. Yeah, so now you can see I have showed you all the methods: ngOnDestroy, ngOnChanges, and also ngOnInit. Now when we go into our, and we can also put a log statement here, which will say first called method, okay, after our constructor. Now when we go into our application here and we load our application, in our inspect we'll see that whenever we go to about page, because all of this logic is on about page, when we go there, you see we got first called method. So our ngOnInit is getting called on first time before any of these methods. Then our constructor gets called, which says data received, right? And till now you see it hasn't called our ngOnChanges, as there is no change to our input data, which is chart data. But if there is any change, then this would also get called, and our update UI will affect. But ngOnDestroy, whenever we go away from this component, which means destroying this component, this should get called. So if I go here on the home component, you see subscription cleaned up at the end. So yeah, that's how you use your Angular lifecycle hooks. These hooks are really essential for managing your component behavior efficiently. So that's all for today's video. If you found this video helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe for more Angular tutorials. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.